Hello, everyone. Welcome back with our Read to the Max, Give to the Max series of events here at the Eastside Freedom Library. Thank you for joining us once again. As always, we're grateful for your participation and your support, but we're also, of course, glad that we have so many people bringing smart ideas and great voices into the space. Tonight we have with us a couple of, I hate to use the word experts because I think all of us are experts on a lot, and that is why we all need to tell our stories and why we all need to read stories as well. But we have with us tonight the Minnesota State Librarian Tami Lee, who is a return guest for us and among our favorite people. We do have a lot of favorite people, but I always look forward to what you're having to say tonight. And Jody Gray, who is an associate university librarian for research at the University of Minnesota. I think I said that close to right.
Yeah, no, perfect, absolutely.
Yeah, all right, good. And just welcome to the Eastside Freedom Library. Thank you for being with us. I'm not going to do too much in the way of introducing the time and space. We've done a lot of that throughout the day. But we're really excited to hear sort of the perspectives that you're bringing, not just on libraries and book banning, but sort of what that means in a broader cultural context. And I know you have some really smart topics that are probably more on point than what we're thinking of, but I am going to let you guys have this conversation, and maybe some of our online audience can jump in as well as we're talking. So I'll let you take it away.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Clarence. And we have good questions because of the questions that Clarence and Kristen sent us. So,
yes, absolutely.
So we're really happy to have this. Jody, do you want to go first and say a little bit more about?
Sure, I can talk a little bit about who I am and why I'm here. First of all, I always like to start with, a land acknowledgement and recognizing that we are on Dakota land, but also I'm a member of the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe in South Dakota, and so I always carry them in my heart, so I always want to acknowledge them when I'm speaking in different spaces as well. And yeah, I work at the university right now, but I think today I'm not really thinking of this conversation in terms of like academia. It's really more about community, and I've been a librarian since 2003, and I've supported different departments on different subjects in academic libraries. I've worked in the American Library Association for about 4 years as their director of their Office for Diversity, Literacy, and Outreach Services. And it was during that time, I'll talk a lot about some of the experiences that I had there, and then I came back to Minnesota. That ALA is in Chicago. I came back to Minnesota in 2019, and have found my way back into a library in a different kind of role. So I'm very honored to be asked to be here. I think that's the basic bio, and I'll let you.
Excellent. I'm so happy to be sitting on the stage with Jody. Jody is a woman and a librarian that I respect deeply, and so I'm really happy and honored to be here and having this conversation with you. I'm Tami Lee, and currently, or at least for the last 2 years, I've been the State Librarian for Minnesota. I'm the Director of State Library Services and Expanded Learning under the umbrella of MDE, and I really it's been an interesting couple of years. I spent 16 years in the public system as a youth services librarian, and did a lot in that role and was ready to not be as hands-on, but I didn't realize I wouldn't be hands-on almost at all. So
It's
this,
so different, right?
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. This and teaching at St. Kate's really does keep me connected. But I really appreciate, again, that the same as you, the being in the community is really a treat. So thank you so much for the invitation. And I was thinking about what you said, Clarence, about experts. That's, I think, always a struggle in librarianship.
Yeah.
You know, classically and presently, you know, gatekeeping, you know, having all the knowledge, keeping things straight. But you make a great point. Yes, we're all experts in lots of things. And I wouldn't consider myself an expert in libraries even. I think I'm just incredibly passionate and am willing to, like, you know, be a bull in a china shop to, like, make sure that they advance and thrive, and that they are an anchor institution in communities across the nation, and they are symbolic of our democracy. And so that's my expertise. I'll do anything to help them out. So
That's expertise.
yeah.
That's good expertise. Yeah.
So we had some questions. Do you want to
Sure.
get started? All right. So one of the questions that we were talking about and that was asked of us was, can you provide some insights into the recent trends in book bans and challenges faced by libraries?
Yeah, I was thinking about this, and once again, like, I tried to take my academic hat off, because I'm sure, like, I could give lots of statistics, but I think I come from that storytelling kind of community, so I like to tell stories, and I would say, you know, recent trends are not new trends, and so I think about just my life experience, and I was thinking about, like, which banned book had the most impact on me, or what story was that? And I was thinking about The Lone Ranger and Tonto Fist Fight in Heaven by Sherman Alexie, which was a really important book to me because I read it for the first time when I was an undergraduate, and it was the first time I'd ever read literature about Native people that wasn't, like, historical, and was written like with humor, and really reflected back to me the experience I had growing up on the reservation. And I think about how that was so important for me to see myself in that work. And then, like, you kind of go forward a little bit. In 2012, I think, is when it was banned in Arizona. At that time, there was that whole, they were going to get rid of all of ethnic studies, if people remember that particular time. I mean, we're kind of, here we are again, not new, but it is a thing. And then, you know, fighting very, very hard for, in a library space to make sure that those things weren't happening. And I was thinking about when I went to ALA, Sherman Alexie, while I was there, you know, there was a big controversy because he was accused of bad behavior, like bullying behavior and poor behavior to other younger Native writers. And you know, we were giving him an award that year. I can't remember which award, but suddenly there was a, and we'd given him many awards. You know, there's that sense of, what do we do when somebody's behavior is not in alignment with the values that we want to be seeing, but their work is still so important? It's really hard to sort of balance those things. And I remember being in meetings and feeling very torn about, like, what do we need to do, because we do need to take some sort of action, but what does it mean if we, you know, just erase, like, you know, the talk was like, let's just take all the awards back, and it's like, but what does that say too, like, and how are we treating this person, this man of color, also, and I think, you know, during that time, and really got me to think about just the nuance of wanting to like set a story, to control it and to set it down a path that's very binary, and how harmful that is. You know, because I think you can't erase the good things and just when something bad happens. We have to hold those two things together, and that's really hard. I'm not very skilled at that. Like, I'm learning and I'm getting better at it. I also get enraged by things and want to be like, no, this is it. Like, this is the stand I'm taking, and this is the right thing to do. And then I have to step back and think about, like, well, okay, what are the implications of this, and how can I come back to the table with people in, like, conversation around what something means to me and how it might be affecting someone else differently. So I think about, when we think about trends, like going back to that initial question, like none of this is new. Like, we are seeing when I was at ALA, in the Office for Diversity, Literacy, and Outreach Services, we worked very closely with the Office of Intellectual Freedom, which is the office that does all the Banned Book Week and is the one place that tracks all of those cases and provides support to librarians. And that's been going on for many, many years. And so we would look at those statistics every year and talk about, like, where and when they're going up. And I would say, like, right now we're in this moment where that was very important in the library world, but, like, I don't think just community recognized or saw it, but now we're seeing it, like, on the nightly news. I hear it on the radio when I'm going into the office, and it's kind of people are surprised by it, but also it's like, but this has been this way for a while, and so I'm glad that there's attention being taken, but I also always want to remind people, and there are people who've been fighting this battle for a long time.
I agree with you on 100%. This is not new. We've often fought this culture war, this ideological battle in places like schools and libraries, civil rights era, 2012, every point in history, every few years, this battle is fought. Currently, schools and libraries are where this battle is taking place, and it's really incredibly sad to see, especially the things that are the bad words that are being bandied about by people that truly are in service to everyone in the country, teachers, librarians. I mean, everybody intersects with them at some point in their life. And they deserve a lot more respect for not only their humanity, but also for their professionalism and their ability to make decisions in classrooms and in libraries. And so that's a really kind of a sad fallout. I do agree with you as well, as far as like this time, it has spilled out. And I think because, like I mentioned before, libraries, especially of all types, really are an example of our democracy. Libraries, well, let me back up a little bit. When we talk about challenges and bans, if you were to say, Tami, or if you were to ask Tami, what do you think of book challenges? I'd be like, okay. Yeah, I do think that things should be challenged. I do think that communities have a right to question the materials that are available to the public. I do think that communities have the right to do that, but that's not what is happening. What we're seeing are national organizations with agendas that are trying to force an ideology on a community, often not their own, and questioning, having a public and open discussion, having perspective on issues is always healthy and always has been a part of like the American way, sort of thing. But this is something different. Banning, no, I'm not for banning.
Yes.
An example of this, there's a great Indigenous librarian, Debbie Reese,
Oh, yes.
who has taught me so much over the years. But I remember watching her or being in a panel with her, or I wasn't on the panel, I was watching, I was, enjoying the discussion. And somebody had asked about the Laura Ingalls Wilder books, and this was before the ALA decided to change the award, the name of the award. And they had said, would you get rid of all of the Laura Ingalls Wilder books from the library? And there's a great discussion about that. Debbie's answer was yes, but it really made me think about that. And I think, no, I would offer a lot of great alternatives, but I don't think that we should necessarily be banning things that are like Huck Finn or, there is a time and a place, hopefully guided, to be able to, explore and examine those little bits of our cultural history, even though things like the Laura Ingalls Wilder books have been so incredibly damaging, almost as much as our like uncomfortable relationship with sovereign nations since the very beginning, to tribal communities. The depiction of them in those books is horrible. Not to mention paw and blackface. I mean, I'm just like, come on. So, but I still wouldn't say that they should be absolutely taken out of our, out of public spaces. So I think we're talking about a lot of different things when we talk about book challenges and book bans. I think people are still a little bit confused about what those constitute. A little bit of an update, and at least from my perspective in Minnesota, it's really not that bad here, and this is what I'm basing it on. So I did get to just see a woman from Pan America, I think Casey Meehan is her name, and I was so confused. I kept thinking, why does Pan America have so much more data about challenges in Minnesota than I have? Like, I'm supposed to know these things. And I found out that they generally follow school libraries. It's self-reported. They look at newspaper articles and things in the news, and that's how they collect their data. The ALA collects more information, but kind of similarly. There is no like formal survey that goes out. No. So it is keeping tabs, self-reporting, that sort of thing, and then Pan America kind of smushes those things together, and ALA puts those together to let us know what's going on. So in Minnesota, I think that we do have challenges in a lot of communities. I think communities are hurting because of the challenges that are taking place. I don't think it's the Minnesota way, frankly, to like ban, but I do think that it is the Minnesota way to let communities have voices, and I would always, support that. And I do think that that we have some definite things, some solid solutions to these problems in our communities around censorship and things like that we can, move forward on and agree on as one whole Minnesota community. So, and I'm optimistic about those opportunities to be able to do that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good, it's something that we have to be careful of, because you and I had talked a little earlier too about book banning is very like in your face, and there are many sort of nefarious, quiet ways that this work happens, and so we don't want to lose sight of only looking at the thing that draws our attention, because we have to be paying attention to what's happening in the structural sort of spaces around us. Like, I think about the school board this year. The school boards, I don't have children, and I'll be honest, like when I vote for school board people in my neighborhoods, I don't always look that much at their backgrounds. But this year, I made an intentional point of like looking up every single person on the school board when I went in to vote, and I was like, I need to make sure that I'm not inadvertently like letting people into the space to lead that I don't have the same values as. And so I think, you know, we have to be paying attention to both those things that are like big and then those things that are a little more, I don't know, nefarious maybe is not the right word, but quiet or subtle.
Or subtle. And the same can be said for all types of libraries in Minnesota. If you feel strongly about leading in your community in that way, I definitely encourage you to make sure that you're investigating, you're asking your local library, even your branch, like, how is this structured? What is your policy? What is the challenge procedure? What is, you know, what has been challenged? What is, you know, what's going on here in my own community? I think a lot of people, you know, it's hard to, you know, those messages of like, get involved. You know, everybody has, you know, something. They have fur babies or human babies. They have choir practice and soccer on Tuesdays and, you know, and their jobs and all of that kind of stuff. It's hard to expend more energy, but this is actually a really important time. I think all times in history are important, but, you know, if you are concerned about what is happening in your community and in your libraries, then do get involved. There are library boards, library governing boards, and almost every system in the state. And it's not hard. You don't have to spend $30,000 to campaign, you know, that sort of thing, to like get involved with making decisions to the best of your ability for your community. And that's also the Minnesota way. Again, community, local control, local voices are all very big in Minnesota, and we enjoy a freedom in that. And sometimes we don't look at it as a freedom. We're like, oh man, what's happening? But I would say, you know, that is also the reason why you should be involved. Don't let outsiders. I hate to use that language because it just sounds so like, you know, exclusionary, but like, you know, you and your community, you who live there and, you know, should definitely be involved in helping to make decisions for what happens in your community. So, and that is, and Jody is right. She mentioned that we had talked about this, and the book challenges, there hasn't been a lot of banning in Minnesota, but there are other ways that maybe the community is having choice taken away from them, and that is through things like having a voice in your library board, or asking, you know, your local library, like, what's going on, how is this structured, making sure that it is something that is open to the community.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was a part of a Hennepin County American Indian Library Board that, I mean, I think that's a perfect example that was very thriving. We were engaged, and I loved working with the librarians, library staff, and, you know, over time, it just sort of became clear that they weren't going to be getting any more support, and that just sort of dissolved. And so that wasn't like a big, you know, nobody made a big deal out of that, and it, you know, can always be pointed back to, well, there's no structural funding or whatever, but now you've lost the community voice, one that was engaged, and you know, that's also just as bad as the blatant book ban sort of challenges that happen, I think.
Yeah, if the lack of representation of the whole community is not the way of libraries. Ever since the inception of libraries, at least in in the American sense of libraries, obviously libraries had a long history of, gatekeeping, keeping things in scrolls and clay pots hidden away in the dark for one singular scholar to access. That is, definitely a part of the history of libraries. But like kind of post Benjamin Franklin, who is not always the greatest guy, but a pretty cool guy too sometimes. There is this, information for the masses and access. But then libraries continued to not necessarily level the playing field or give information to everyone. Southern libraries wanted to separate at one point from the American Library Association because they didn't want, they were being told by their external leaders, like cities and counties, to follow Jim Crow laws. And, things, and that didn't happen. But yeah, I mean, so libraries are always examining themselves for issues around representation to make sure that all communities are served, that access is being given, and some libraries are doing it better than others, but for the most part, they're trying, that's such an important thing, and you're right. If we don't have that, if we're not minding that, if we're not putting resources, if we're not putting our money where our mouth is, in libraries to make sure that that is happening, then we've lost the communities that we have vowed and pledged to serve. And
I think that's such an interesting distinction about just librarianship, library culture is, we really it is embedded into our education that we should be always thinking of the most vulnerable people, right? And know your community and get to know who the most vulnerable people are. And I think there is this sense of justice is really important, and at the same time, like you're saying, as a profession, we also have not always lived up to that, or we have tended to lead with majority voice, not the most marginalized voices. We tell people what we think they need and how we think they should be doing things. And during my time at ALA, that was a big reckoning around the Office of Intellectual Freedom and this idea of free speech, and that, once again, that sort of binary idea that it was a all or nothing sort of dynamic. But what you do in that space is you can all be believing this is for justice, but you're not recognizing the harm that it's causing along the way. I always like to say that I was taught when I went to library school, libraries are neutral. And I'm like, neutrality doesn't exist.
No.
That's not a real thing. That is a made up thing that has not served anyone well. And we need to stop perpetuating that idea. Libraries have always been political. They've always had a voice. And I think that's also why they get attacked. I think that's why they become the target. And we see that over and over again throughout history, and we should just own that and understand that we are taking we have a position. We're not neutral. It's not real.
The whole issue of library neutrality, I think, is an interesting one, but I'm going to back up just a little bit about the education aspect. So, for many, many years, and we're talking about ladies in shirtwaist dresses and kitten heels, sort of library school era. There definitely was a bent towards, we will curate materials that are morally improving for the masses. We will, determine, Sally and Billy, that this is a good book, for you. I mean, that is in the structure of professional librarianship. And, but then pretty soon, people like Sandy Berman came along and other, activists in library land were like, no, you're supposed to serve everybody. You're supposed to represent everybody. That is and you don't get to decide what is morally improving. And so, we saw we started to back away from that. And, and I think when we're talking about neutrality, I think those kind of things kind of go together. One thing that I have been thinking about a lot lately is professionalism. There are lots of wonderful people. In fact, most people in libraries don't have a master's degree in library science, and that is okay. There are people that love libraries. They want to provide access in the same vein. Not that I have a lot of respect for Melville Dewey, because also not always a great guy, though he did invent a language that you should look up. This kind of shortened language, it was kind of interesting. But he called it library spirit. And I do believe in library spirit. And so I do love that we have this kind of strata in libraries, but I also would never want to lessen the importance of at least having a few key people around things like collection development that have had all of this knowledge, or have earned or gained this knowledge in library school, which I think some people classify it as like an amplifying degree, something that makes a natural bent, greater. But I would encourage, and I do think that I would encourage the MLIS, and I do think that it's important when we're having discussions today. I think a lot of, and I think one of the things in the battle is taking away or devaluing the professionalism that is involved in librarianship, and it's hard to disseminate all of the things that you get around the information that you glean in library school around intellectual freedom and Bill of Rights and Raganathan's principles and all of that kind of stuff, and that's a guy who came up with the 5. What am I thinking? Principles of librarianship. I think that laws. Yeah. Thank you. But all of those things are important. So it's important to have a few key people in your libraries, in all libraries, but also it's important to have people with library spirit too. And so, 100%. And that's how the bulk of the actual relationshiping gets done. That's how people get hooked up with help with getting social services or finding, tutoring or, things like that. And so everybody's important and plays a different role. But I do think one of the weapons in our current situation is the devaluation of the professional knowledge there. And I'm sorry, I just kind of wandered off.
No, I think it's not at all. I think it's very important. And I think, to me, also, in what you just said, is also the recognition of, not everybody has an MLIS, and that's okay. We are a profession. I think about that in tribal communities because, even now with online MLIS programs, they're a little bit more accessible, but that's really only maybe 10 years worth of accessibility. And even then, when I go home to South Dakota, my family doesn't have good internet. That's the infrastructure there on the reservation is not one that would necessarily allow me to do that. But we have a library. We have a person who's in who is our librarian in the tribe, and they like you said, they have that library spirit, and they are working with the community, those small communities, much like this Eastside Freedom Library is built with. You don't have to build it within the normal infrastructure, right? And in fact, I think it's good that we have different ways of coordinating and organizing And it also goes back to the thing you said earlier too, which is challenges are good, because that is where you get the community's voice, is when they come in and say, this, I'm not being represented, I'm not okay with this. And I think that's something that is not taught in those library school programs, to value the challenge.
Yes.
And I'd love to see that happen a little bit more, because I think
true.
that that's something that is hard. You know, a lot of us, it's a very female-oriented profession, and conflict, I mean, I know that is a generalization, but it is true. Like, conflict is not the natural tendency. And so...
And the profession as a whole.
Yes, yes, exactly. But I think it should be.
Yeah.
Like, to be good at what we're doing, we have to be okay with conflict. I would always say, when I would teach DEI classes, that, you know, when we talk about inclusion, inclusion is not everybody's happy.
Yes.
Inclusion means everybody gets to say their piece without punishment.
Yep.
And we can upset each other and still be in a space together.
Yep.
And that's very different. And I think a lot of people sort of take that idea of inclusion and think, well, somehow we can make everybody happy and we can all come to a common space. And I think we need to move away from that idea, because I think that's harmful too. That's keeping us in this sort of yes or no binary kind of world that we're in right now.
I think what you said earlier about the whole challenge thing. Not only do the community can come together and say, I'm not represented, or, you know, I disagree with this, that sort of thing too. But I also think in that process, communities come together and people are given a chance to express their fears and see other perspectives, and maybe, you know, ways to not fear, or just to have their... I remember a long time ago, I was working at a small branch of a library system, and it was during the Paula Deen, the chef, had said some, you know, provocatively gross words, I guess. And it was being talked about. And this patron that I actually enjoyed, I had seen them over time, came in and slammed down a bunch of the cookbooks on the desk. And she said, I'm sure you're going to be getting rid of these. And they were all Paula Deen books. And I was like, no, why? I love her, you know, and I pointed to the recipes that I liked, you know, and we talked butter and stuff like that. And she said, I didn't think I could talk to you about that. And so then I said, why did you? You know? And she said, because I see you and you're friendly and you're a person to me, and I don't really know anybody else that looks like you. And so, you know, I always took that as kind of like yet another reason why representation matters. Why representation matters in our collections, why representation matters in our staff, why we need to like represent all parts of the community, because that woman would have kept that to herself, you know, eating away, you know, and really her worries about, you know, around things like race. And I didn't have like a deep conversation with her, but it was, you know, about it. That wasn't necessarily my place, and she wasn't asking, and I wouldn't have anyway. But she was able to connect and have those fears, some of those fears allayed by, you know, humanizing somebody that she felt really different from. And yeah, I think that's really important to make sure that we have in all forms. Yeah, not just collection, not just, you know, who we let in. Well, that's the other thing that I was going to say earlier too. Sorry, I keep jumping back and forth.
That's fine.
But often as well, we have a history of having libraries as like, oh yes, you're welcome into our space, and whatever dominant culture is running that library, you know, is making sure like, well, but you've got to follow dominant culture rules, you know, sort of thing. And so that's made spaces, library spaces, traditionally uncomfortable for people that are not a part of, who are not in the in crowd, and who are in, you know, and I think that's another thing that we have a hard time in, that we're working through right now, and that Eastside Freedom Library is a great example of not doing, of having that representation, making sure everybody is, here and welcome. So.
Well, and I think the other piece that we maybe haven't touched on as much is really this, like the thing that scares me is the idea that we're going to erase history, even the painful history. We need, if we're going to grow and evolve as human beings, we need to see that. And I feel like that's like a big part of the motivation for both, like, people want to ban books that are about representation of LGBT or Black, Indigenous people of color, but a lot of it too is this idea that, like, we don't want to hear the history in a way that makes somebody feel bad. And, that is also very disturbing to me. And also, like, that has happened to Black, Indigenous people of color since history was being taught. Like, they were not seen, they were devalued. So this idea that some kids or some people get to feel good about history is really something that I think, I feel like I'm not saying it very well, but I feel like that's another piece of the puzzle that's bigger than, and that's why, like, looking at your school boards and looking at the curriculum that people are allowing to get through is also so important to do for your community and to step up and be representative in those spaces if you're able. And I don't feel like we talk about that enough, yeah.
I agree. That makes me think of the University of Wisconsin-Madison, what is it called again? They collect the stats on the number of children's books published that are either by or by or about children of BIPOC or authors from marginalized communities, and that feature lead protagonists that are
We
kids.
need diverse books. No.
No, it is. I love them, and I have a little sign on my desk, and I cannot remember off the top of my head. I'm having like microphone,
I know.
Nervousness or something. But there's a group that, and I'll definitely make sure that Eastside Freedom Library knows what I'm talking about, and you might want to post this on your site, but they collect statistics every year. And the first time they did it, I think it was 2000. Well, no, they've done it since like the late 70s or early 80s, I think. And but in 2011, a children's book illustrator just decided to go off on their own and illustrate these statistics. It was a little bit problematic in that they illustrated the statistics in a way that put like just modern kids, presumably in America, in cultural costumes that what you wouldn't find them in, just walking around playing,
Right.
But she was trying to make a point, and the point was about the number of books that are published and represent and reflect. There's this wonderful librarian, Rudine Sims Bishops, that has this thought about books are mirrors, sliding doors, or windows, mirrors, or sliding doors for children. And she was just trying to illustrate that. And I think often when I think like, oh no, what about representation for dominant cultures? And I'm like, look at the statistic. Like 99% of all of the things published are for you. And then half of 1% is, and the thing about it is the first time people started noticing it because of this infographic in 2011, they've done it every few years. Sarah Park Dolan while she was at St. Kate's did it. Molly Beth Griffin, a local author, contributed to it, and a bunch of others. And that number really hasn't gone up.
No.
And, it's slightly, I think the highest for African American kids. I think the second is Asian American, Latinx or Latina. And then tiny for Indigenous children as far as representation in books. And in fact, the number of books that feature animals as lead protagonist is greater than all of those put together. All kids that are, all kids from marginalized communities put together, which is still just kind of sad.
That is.
And I think that that desire to always be on top and to not have anything painful is, we've talked about that, and you've taught EDI, so obviously, that's that comfort level. I always want to be comfortable. I don't want to have to think about the bad things. I want to move forward. I want to assume that we're, that all the problems are solved, and that, from 1863 to now, it's a merit
Right.
system,
Right.
that sort of thing, and that's not true. And it's okay, to know that that's not true. I wish we had more titles in collections, but those are the titles that get challenged. But that basically talk about that it's okay to sit with that. It's okay to, and there's no shame in it. You didn't do it, and you don't have to carry it forward. But sadly, we don't have as many titles as we need like that. But
Well, and that's just the normal state of things. That's not even in the challenge space. It's just like we can't even we can't break through to the publishers to make, books profitable. And that's why, like, going back to my story about Sherman Alexie, why it's so complicated, because I feel like it's like, well, if there are very few Native writers, then if we eliminate any of them, what does that say for us? And so there's like a scarcity, little bit of mindset there too, but also like, and what this individual did is not okay. But that's where it becomes like, for me and my own identity, that those were the things where I was just like going back and forth, like how do I navigate this, because now I'm being pulled in so many directions. And another thing we kind of talked about earlier was thinking about like the harm that comes to the community and how we don't really put that in the center. You were mentioning that yesterday, and I thought that is such an important point, that whether a decision is made about like, maybe, no, we're not going to ban the book, and people celebrate that, that doesn't take away that now a bunch of people have just heard in their community that they are not valued, children and people in the community. And what are we doing to reconcile or give space to like help navigate or do some restorative sort of practices for those communities? Because once again, just because a challenge isn't goes in the favor that you want, doesn't mean it doesn't have
there
a
still
long
hasn't
going
been
impact.
damage done.
There's like a lot of damage.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And it is hard, I would defer to you because you have taught in this area, but we both have lived experience in this area too. But when we have those conversations, when people say we can't have this here because it's not like, or it's not, I don't agree with it, that sort of thing. Often, we are talking about the humanity of people, and we think. Well, for one, let me tell you, there is not one pornographic book in any like public or school library in the state of Minnesota, in the nation. Nothing is, and but I can see where people would disagree or be, have their sensibilities offended, all of that kind of stuff. And they have a right to voice that opinion, and the community has a right to bring that to bear. But often that's not what's at issue. It's often things like, Morris Micklethwaite's orange tangerine dress or whatever, or something like that, where, you know, it's just the existence, or it's the existence of Ruby Bridges and part of her story. It's the existence of, you know, I'm forgetting, I love that book that Sherman Alexie's book, but who's the main character? The existence of, and how dare this boy, you know, on a reservation have these, you know what I mean, funny thoughts, and
Now I'm
how
gonna
can I
forget
relate to,
everything,
yeah, and I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of the protagonist, but I loved that book.
can't either.
And, you know what I mean? And that's not right. That's, and when we do that, then, and we have that discussion, even though so often there are champions for what is right in that situation, yeah, we're still, that community's humanity is in question. And I think people don't realize that and the damage that it does. So I think we'll see more scholarship about that. I have run across, you know, like, hey, I think somebody did more of an anecdotal article about, they surveyed informally some black children in school where they had a challenge. And I think it was like, I am Ruby Bridges, or maybe it was, the one about the Supreme Court justice. I can't remember which one. But like, yeah, how'd you feel about that? How'd you feel about that book being challenged and that not being worthy of being, you know, and the civil rights story not being told? How come, you know, you couldn't read it? They wanted to take it out so no one could see it, you know, sort of thing. That's part of your history. How did you feel about it?
Yeah.
And obviously the responses were not good.
Yeah, it's so, and that, you know, when I, once again, going back to my time at ALA, like, we would talk a lot about that with the Intellectual Freedom Office around, like, these challenges we have to, if we're really doing this work around equity and inclusion, we have to also name harm that exists when challenges come. But yeah, there's not a lot of, like, practices or research or anything, like, especially at that time. And so we were trying to, like, make up, like, what would we do? Like, let's look at, maybe social services has, like, as a profession or an industry, like, some ways that they manage these spaces. And so we would look to them to sort of, like, build out some resources that we could offer. But I think it is something that it would be great to have. I mean, it'd be great if we didn't need it.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what would be great.
Yeah.
But I think we do need it, and so I think it's something that's going to grow, and we're seeing it grow, the trauma-informed sort
Yes,
of
exactly.
librarianship. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, that was question number one.
Yeah, I know. And I see Clarence.
Well, I was just wondering if you wanted to do some other questions, or is there
Sure.
something on there
No,
that you...
If there are questions from you
Well-
or staff or outside or anybody here, then we totally.
Well, I have one, and you sort of addressed this somewhat. But, you know, we've seen over the past maybe 2 decades consolidation of library systems. So, for example, you know, Washington County has their own system, and Hennepin County has their own system. Here, St. Paul has their own system, and Ramsey County, the rest of Ramsey County has their own system. But there's like a political structure, you know, and these are political subdivisions. Like, what do you see the impact of that being on, not necessarily book banning in particular, but sort of accessibility? You know, where has it helped? Where has it made it more difficult? You know, Hennepin County now has a very different, you know, landscape depending upon where you are in the county and what the library is like, and it's being governed countywide. So, you know, access, what does it mean for, you know, what winds up on the shelves, what the staffing looks like, and, you know, maybe what challenges might happen. I don't know what you've seen in other parts of the state, other parts of the country, but maybe if you wanted to talk about that. I think it's really important when we're talking about what can we do as citizens to be involved and have an impact on, you know, a healthy library.
I'm gonna do this.
Oh.
Is, the state librarian is here.
Let me see. It is, Minnesota has not a complicated, actually it works for Minnesota. It does definitely make sure, again, that local control, that community input into library systems. But yes, in the metro area, our library systems are often, or for the most part, governed by county board systems. And we used to have pretty much across the state, and Minnesota State Statute 134.9 lays out all of the rules and regulations for how to establish a library and how to establish a library governing board. I think people think, oh, board schmords, it's a bunch of, coffee clutching, older citizens in whatever community getting together to make some decisions. But it's actually vitally important. It is so vitally important. And it is true service to the democracy. I sound so dramatic, but really it is.
No, you're right.
It is so important for communities to empower their library boards, because that's where advocacy is done. So when you have library governing boards, they're looking at every single aspect of what they're doing in their systems with a community anchor, strong library that serves the whole community. That's at the forefront. When we take that away, when we say, anything less than that means less advocacy for the library, and then often the library can be devalued or diluted, that sort of thing. And so we definitely, it is a great way for citizens and Minnesota residents to step up and make sure that libraries are empowered and that they continue. Obviously, libraries are always evolving and changing, and that's what should be happening. For years, people were like, oh, there's not going to be a need for library because we got Google. Yeah, and that's not true. And that's kind of how we've ended up with like an age of disinformation and misinformation. But in Minnesota, we do have we have 12 regional public library systems across the state, and we're in the metro. Eastside Freedom Library is an independent library, and I think we have 3 or 4 in the state, and I should know that.
I don't know.
I should be able to name them all. East Grand Forks is one. Eastside Freedom Library, I can't remember the other one, those 12 regional public library systems cover the whole state, and within those systems, they either have a consolidated system where they have a centralized board and decision making, or they're federated where they have individual, and those are usually libraries that are attached to cities, things like that. And so we have all those little library boards that for those individual communities. It's worked well. Hawaii has a state library where for all 7 islands, is it 7 islands? Yeah. Where there's one library system for the whole state, and that works for them. Every state has some different structure to their library systems, but that's how Minnesota goes. So there's, ask at your local public library, who is on the library board for this library. So in the metro, it's a consolidated system. So they're going to have Ramsey County is going to have a board. Ask in the metro area, ask for who is on your library advisory board. And then also look and see online who is on your county board, and go to those county board meetings and remind them that libraries are important, and they are community anchors, and that a librarianship and the activities of libraries are important. They don't just contribute to things like workforce or health or things like that. That also the core of libraries are libraries, and that's an important thing. So I don't know if that answers.
I would just add, like, I think one of the things that sort of part of your question as I was hearing it was like, what are, the barriers to these processes? And I would say they're complicated. That's what, like, the biggest barrier. Like, if you want to get involved with your library board, it's not always clear how you do that. And then there's often a structure, right? And a timeline. Like you go up and you get added to a ballot at a certain time. And so it's not very conducive to like people who in the moment are like really motivated to do something. And so that can like become a barrier for like people being able to just navigate, how do I get involved? Where are those meetings? Those meetings, to your point earlier, like it's like you have to go to them. Like that representation isn't out in the community as often. And so I think the structure can be helpful for libraries and just keeping the lights on and like being resourced and all of those things, but it also can be a barrier to communities, especially because it's just complicated.
True. That is very true. And yeah, and you can start at your reference desk or at your library's website. One thing that does make it a little bit easier, at least to be paying attention, is most things are virtual now, as far as like those monthly library board meetings and county board meetings are, you're making dinner, you got your laptop, you're listening, and you're like, what? They want to do what? I will write an email, I will send a text. So so that is also, even though it's somewhat passive, you're still involved, you're informed. And that's really important. I think in a lot of areas, not just libraries, we're complacent, we're busy, things are hard, things are difficult. And, but as soon as we wake up, then we're full of steam and we're like, okay, what do I do to fix this? And often, if we just were to pay a little bit more attention to those things, then we could catch them maybe before they get to be really bad. So, but you're right, it is bureaucratic a little bit, and
Thank you so much for this conversation. I have a question about, I really admire the ways that when there's a rise in book bans, there's also often a community response. And so, for example, when Arizona, as you mentioned, was banning ethnic studies, Libro Traficante created a mobile library to drive around the state in order to put books of ethnic studies into people's hands. Right now, the Books Unbanned initiative is allowing young people, teenagers through mid-20s, to access the full collections of Brooklyn Public Library, Boston Public Library, Seattle Public Library, and some parts of the Los Angeles Public Library. And so I wondered if there are other, and then during the pandemic, I know that some libraries got rid of book fees or, made changes to overdue books to make access to books more possible. So I wondered if there are creative responses in the works, or if you have creative ideas, things that you would like to bring to fruition to make meaningful books get into the hands of people who are looking for them.
I mean, I don't know of a coordinated effort, like especially here in Minnesota, but I mean, programs like that, I think, are exactly what we need to be lifting up and supporting in different ways. It goes, I work in academic libraries, and I've been thinking a lot about what academic libraries can be doing for our public libraries, because we're not being targeted in the same manner. A lot of the book banning tends to focus on K through 12. And so it's not that we don't have some of these issues, it's just that we're not being targeted in the same way. So we maybe have some energy to do things, to be more supportive. And I think about that, but I don't have an answer for that. We've been working with the Office of Human Rights a little bit more at the university, just thinking about like, this is a human rights issue. And so like, are there things that we could be taking that angle of like activism out into the community? I think it is just about those like individuals who come up with those wonderful ideas to like challenge the system. I mean, and we need to recognize that there are different places besides the libraries where people can have access. Like we're focused on libraries, but I think I'm curious. I have not seen the publishers get attacked as much. And so, like, what could publishers be doing to, like, get their books out in different spaces and to different communities that maybe aren't beholden to the bureaucracy of the library? I think they're probably, and maybe they are, I don't know.
Well, a couple of things. There is actually, St. Paul, I think, is working on some activities that are similar to the Books on Band initiative. So I'm sure that they'll be rolling out something to chat with us more about. So the idea to bring it here has been expressed by several different librarians across the state. They were just actually presenting at the Minnesota Library Association. Was that last month? At the beginning of October. And so there's some excitement around that. And I think that St. Paul's doing some activities around that, but I'm not clear exactly what they are, and maybe the Friends of the St. Paul Library as well. So if you want to get involved, I mean, I'm sure that they would love to have community support or input or perspective around those sort of things. As far as publishers, I'm not going to... I won't denigrate in any way, shape, or form publishers. Obviously, there's some great publishers, and publishing is a business. The Lee and Lowe study from 2015 and 2019, I think it was 2015 and 2019, show, though, that publishing is basically run by a dominant culture that doesn't relate well and has a fear, and obviously is always looking at the bottom line. And so we have actually seen publishers and like database owners, things like that, take proactive measures to protect their bottom line. So, for instance, you can look it up. It's public knowledge, the whole Scholastic thing, where they're, letting communities opt out of certain types of books in their collection for book fairs, or there's other publishers and vendors that they're keeping track, and they're doing some really wonderful things for libraries and schools and things like that to help mitigate, but really ultimately it affects their bottom line. And so this ain't good for publishers either.
Right.
And then also, I do believe strongly that I have heard from different vendors and publishers and database holders or database companies that they are policing themselves for self-censorship. And that's a constant issue that they talk about it all the time. And these are people that are used to just like, hey, look at my books, buy them. You know what I mean? And so they really are diving a deeper, for the most part, into real social issues. And so hopefully that will create change too over time.
Right.
Those are the two things that I've seen. As far as other examples around serving underserved communities or underrepresented communities, or finding ways, I think there are too many to name. There's so many champion librarians and library workers out there that are doing, just fabulous work, they're just, the fact that we even still have, with all of the things, with COVID, with low pay rates, the devaluation of the profession, the devaluation of libraries, and you still can count on a door being opened at 10 a.m. and being able to walk in, I'm going to get teary about that.
Oh.
I mean, it hasn't been easy. And a lot of professions haven't been easy, but, librarianship really hasn't. And you can still open that door, come in, get the information you need, get support, find connections. Yeah.
I have a couple of things from Maggie Snow from Minitext first.
Hi, Maggie.
Your local library card, and this is something I found out that was really cool when I started working at one of the public libraries, is that your local library card can be registered at almost any public library in Minnesota. Mm-hmm. So that's something to remember. I remember registering a card from someone who was way up on the Iron Range. Yeah. And so that's something to remember. But Maggie also says Minnesota has a robust network of resource sharing that can get books into hands of Minnesota residents. And maybe you want to say something about how that works and what Minitext is.
Oh no, now it's going to come to me.
Okay, so
we can both do it.
a little transparency here.
I have another question for you, Jody. So
a little transparency here. Who has 2 brown thumbs and had lunch with Maggie Snow today?
Oh.
And so I'm sorry, Maggie, that I did not bring up the library card thing or Minitext, though I love you, and I think that Minitext does wonderful, wonderful work. What was the second part of the question that you were asking?
but
Minitext.
how much does Minitext, and just also, a robust network of sharing that can get you
Yes.
almost everything.
So,
I think the thing to note, sort of thinking about why Minitext is unique in Minnesota, is not every state has a Minitext.
Yes, exactly.
So it is unique to Minnesota, and it is a resource that brings all of the libraries together. And we're a big state with a lot of rural areas too. So I think it really is beneficial to places that might not have the resources or ability. We are able to get them materials all around this state.
If you've heard of Interlibrary Loan, MinLink, we can take something from the Twin Cities and send it, to the Iron Range. We can take something from Duluth and send it over there. Not to mention, also, doesn't Minitext manage WorldCat and things from other states, other countries? It is just a super.
They negotiate access to data, those EBSCO
Exactly.
databases for folks within the state.
All the holdings for the university system across the state have been made accessible to public libraries as well with Minitext. So they move things around physically, they move data around, they move
and
everything
they educate.
around.
Once again, they take, especially for those smaller rural spaces that maybe don't have the professional development ability, they have people who go out into those communities to make sure that the libraries folks are getting the most current best practices. And
From best practices to the mitigation of events like tornadoes. I mean, they do emergency preparedness and digital archives. They have historical stuff. They keep state. And they have a vault. I don't know if that's a public thing. If they take tours, can you take tours there?
yeah, you can take tours.
Yeah, you should. It's very cool.
Yeah.
But Minitext is a great organization, a great, I classify them as a library support agency in the state, and they are our most preeminent library support agency. They make the library world go round. Everybody uses them. Everybody, does he say Freedom Library?
Yeah.
Everyone.
Because our books don't circulate.
Oh.
That's right.
So,
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, that's right. Okay,
Yeah.
Sorry, Maggie. I'll make it up to you.
A A question for Jody, and maybe you can both answer this, but what is, maybe say more about the state of libraries on college campuses and college systems. And one of the things that I see all the time, and I think, Tami, you alluded to this, is students not recognizing how important it is to access information that has gone through some sort of process where you can know that it's verifiable, but also the highest level of scholarship on that issue, you know, and like where do you see students on that right now? Where do you see professors on that now? And what is like the library's relationship with the university?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are many different angles to that. The critical analysis is really like, when people were like, Google's here, we can look up everything. Like, I think the thing, we were already doing it in all libraries, but in academic libraries in particular, is like, how do you actually like analyze the quality of the information that you're getting, and that there is a skill set to that. And so like a lot of the work that happens in the academic libraries with students is about either one-on-one consulting or teaching them how to like develop those skills. They're very like needed skills that aren't all consistently taught in the public school system. And so when you come to college, we really try and bring that level of, question where your information comes from and learn about how it came to be. And I think that it is not something that is, that's where we need to work with our faculty to make sure that their curriculum is also pointing people to utilize the libraries. One of the things that we talk about a lot right now is AI, and how is that going to impact everything, which is kind of an unknown. And so we're all trying to figure out like, okay, if this is something that people are going to use, like how do we use it? Like I always sort of think of it as like, how do we use these things responsibly? Just because we have them, we have to have some sort of ability to check the quality and to question. We shouldn't just be taking in information blindly. And that's really what I see a big part of academic libraries talking about. Both access is big, like the ability to get people what they need at 3 a.m. when they're doing their papers in a second. If we can, we work really hard to do that. And then, and our spaces are also like, I feel like when I started in academic libraries, it was all books and bookshelves everywhere. And now, like, if you go into those spaces, like, it's a lot about how do we build out space for the students to work together and to be in a space where they're encouraged to collaborate and to question, the information that they're looking through. I don't know if that's exactly what what the question was looking for, but that's kind of how I see what's happening in academic libraries. If you compare it to what we've been talking about, like, I would say college campuses are dealing with reckoning of like speakers who come to campus. They get a lot of, if a certain speaker comes to campus and we don't want, the students will be outspoken, but that's targeted at the university, not so much at the libraries. But the libraries hopefully can be a place where people can learn more about whatever they are protesting. But I think that's about as close. Like, I don't see many book challenges, but I am not paying attention to absolutely every university.
I think, the university libraries are not structured to, there is, academic reasoning, the collection development, and the dean of libraries is a different There's a different spin on it than
yeah.
in public and school libraries and other types of libraries, for sure.
Yeah, it's in a
Yeah.
different infrastructure
Yeah.
and with different bureaucracy.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I do, one thing that I would piggyback on your comment about is I always think of academic libraries as being almost a whole step ahead as far as like the evolution of libraries. So like you talk about the spaces and making spaces for students to work together. I definitely think that spaces like in public libraries are also, I'm not remembering the scholar, but wrote about how in public libraries, having librarians can act as people that facilitate content creation in the public space of the library, as far as evolving with the needs of the community. And again, not that I love books and I love being surrounded by books, but yeah, as those shrink, those physical collections shrink, then our role morphs a little bit and changes into, and I always feel like academic libraries are a great example, and we should probably be looking to them a little bit more, like, oh, what's going to happen next? Okay, we'll get ready for it, sort of thing. So,
Yeah, are the students getting to that though? I mean, do you have a sense of how many students are still thinking I can go to Google or I can just do a search and I'll find it on the internet and that's the information I'm going to have, rather than doing that more critical look at information? Because the library classes aren't required as much as they used to be. So
No, but that's why I say, like, that's where that partnership with the faculty is so important, like, to be embedded into the curriculum and is really a goal, and that's where a lot of our liaisons are building out those relationships. And then it becomes about, like, we definitely have many students doing it because we have a large group of liaisons, and it's hard to like scale the number of consultations and classes that we are asked to teach in. So I think it's, I don't know off the top of my head how we gather that information or what that is, but I think that's in our world where the students are sort of put to the test, is when they're actually even passively, sometimes the curriculum will push them into a library space because Google just isn't going to. Oh, well, and Google Scholar honestly pushes you into the library space. So they may not, I think sometimes they're utilizing us and they don't even realize it. And I think that's okay too, as long as they're getting to good information somewhere. I don't think we're all that interested in like credit for it. Yeah, yeah. So I think but then there are some disciplines and some spaces where, of course, there's gaps. We're going to be missing some students, but I do think it's amazing to watch how many students are using, like, because coming back out of COVID, when I first started going back to the office, I work in Wilson Library, it was just like all of us staff, and then there's like all this empty space. But now it's people waiting to get into like the study spaces, and I think that's, I think people innately find value in libraries, whether it's public or academic.
okay, thanks. Thank you. It's kind of time to wrap up, sadly. We don't have theme music to go with it, and I'm not going to sing anything, but we have like a couple minutes left. If you wanted to say anything, I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions.
I feel like we kind of hit all of them. We just didn't say what they were.
Exactly.
We didn't name them out loud.
We
but
touched on everything in
them.
there.
Yeah.
But like, if there are any closing words that you want to share with folks, that would be great to wrap it up, and then
I'll let you go
we'll
first.
call it a day.
I just want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to share our stories. And I want, to encourage people and also to motivate myself to be as active as possible. Like I said, this year I was more active about making sure I knew who was running for a school board, who's running for the library board, and we need to be doing those things. It's easy to be complacent even when you're I'm very passionate about this stuff, but of course, I also will just, it hasn't felt like it needed my attention for a long time, and now I see my attention is needed in these spaces. And so I encourage people to take the time to figure out how to be involved and informed about their systems.
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna echo that, and again, it sounds really overly dramatic, maybe, but library. What is it? The canary in the coal mine sort of situation, or what is the adage about? You can tell a society by how it treats its children, or its elderly, or its that sort of thing. Libraries really are one of our remaining truly democratic spaces. Nobody's going to, the DMV is great, but nobody's spreading a blanket. Nobody's spreading a blanket out on the floor and modeling early literacy. Nobody's, helping people do things other than what the DMV is for. Nobody has, the curiosity to help, people in a self-directed way learn what they learn what they want to learn so they can live a satisfying life, that sort of thing. And so that is fundamentally important. The libraries are never these awful spaces as we've lately been characterized as being. We are always wanting to expand and grow, and it's all about that self-directed learning, that enlightenment. We often attach libraries to education, but just as valuable as learning how to fix that engine so you can go get a job as a mechanic is that kid that needs to just come and play Roblox for 3 hours. That's just as valuable as anything else. So I hope people remember that and get involved and maintain that in their communities, because it is just so important. They're characterized on paper as community anchors, and they truly are. They're places to meet, connect, to learn, to grow, to be enlightened, and let's not lose that. Let's not lose that in these really temporary, fleeting battles that are happening, around. This too shall pass. Libraries will remain. So.
Well, thank you, both of you. We're honored to have both of you here, honestly. So we appreciate that. And I just want to remind everyone, well, first of all, thank you for joining us for this great conversation and for this great day. We appreciate the support that we've been getting throughout the day. Remember, it is a Give to the Max Day. There's still time. There's time to offer your support if you are able to financially. There's time to tell your friends through whatever means possible. I hope that you appreciate the work. I appreciate the work of the people that we work with and hear from. We want to keep these conversations going. We want to keep the space open for a lot of the conversations that don't get had at other places, and for people to know that they can come here and do that. We also would like to see you in the library to experience the space. It is one of 3 Carnegie buildings in the city of St. Paul, and we are so lucky to be able to exist in one of them. So. read to the max, give to the max, and just enjoy the thoughts and ideas and knowledge of your neighbors and your own voice as well. Have a good night. Thanks.
Thank you.